Okay, greetings. You're listening to Fire on Your Head. And this week on the podcast, I'm privileged to have my guest. I forgot to ask you offline how to pronounce your name right. Amber Picota?
Picota, yes,
Okay,
good.
I got it on the first try. It doesn't always happen that I get it on the
hmm
first try. And we've been in touch a little bit for a number of weeks, maybe a few months, about doing an interview. And it dawned on me, and I think I said this in the email to you, that this is the first time in years I've had a female guest, which I think is kind of ironic for like this stuff we're going to talk about anyway. Not because I don't ever have women on my podcast, but most of the times that I've invited people on, I've never had an answer or heard back from people. So it's been like 6 years since I've I've had female guests, and sometimes I have people they contact me and they say, "Why don't you ever have any women on your podcast?" I was like, "That's a good idea. If any of them take me up on on the invitation, then I will." So say something so people know that you're actually there.
Hello, I'm Amber.
So you're also a fellow Destiny Image about to be published author, and the title of your book is
God's feminist movement.
right. So if we're going to talk about that, I haven't read the book. I've not. I've got no idea what's in it. It could be. I mean, I have no idea where we'll be in agreement, where we'll be in disagreement. I have no idea what'll happen in our conversation today. We're just turning this on and going for it. But that's really interesting to me. And the reason is because I grew up in a Plymouth Brethren church where like women aren't allowed to be preachers, or at least they maybe now they say that they don't feel that way. I don't know. But when I grew up, it was like, no. And, I knew people who left that church because they thought like women were given too much, liberty and things to do. And they thought, no, no, no. And we weren't the type of church that like head coverings were obligatory, but we were like other churches in that denomination in our hometown. They would like give you a head covering at the door if you didn't have one and stuff like that, right? So, but then I went to a charismatic Bible college in Pensacola, Florida, and the first research paper I did was on women in ministry. Basically to just explore the opposite and give that to anybody at back home that might be willing to read it. So I'm all for women in ministry and whatever, with the caveat that not everybody should be, just like not everybody should be a pastor, not everybody should be whatever. So anyway, yeah. So I don't have any specific questions to start off with, but I got your blog open here. Let's start there. How long you been blogging?
I've been blogging. Now, my journey as a blogger has transformed over the years. So I started out as like a fitness and food blogger. But overall, I've been blogging for probably 4 years now, for probably close to 5 years.
Okay. And do you find the habit of writing a blog like helped make it easy to get writing a book?
Yes. As what I do is I will write pretty concentrated on a subject that's really like it's really strong on my heart. It's really heavy on my heart at the moment. I'm feeling really passionate about it. And even though I'll go through a rough draft before I obviously put it on my blog, when I go back to like refine it for putting it in a book, I still find that I have to do a lot of adjustments and like maybe my perception has changed a little bit. And sometimes I'm even like, I kind of disagree with myself
Right.
because if it was like a year old, I may have studied more on a topic. But yeah, blogging to me is, even though I have rough drafts, it's like the slightly less rough draft version, but I feel like it makes my books more refined
Right.
and maybe not, it's still just as passionate and raw, but I've thought about it from other angles and thought about how my words can be perceived and how I can appeal to people from various backgrounds. So I find it to be just slightly more sharp by the time I get to the book writing phase of it.
Right. Say I had some Kindle books I published where they were basically like repurposing blog material. And then with the Tongues book, maybe like 20 or 30% of that was content that had been on my blog. And then the rest of it, I decided to go for it like fresh so that as little of the book as possible had already been on the internet. Because like the first time I submitted a book to Amazon, they said like, no, we've got this, we've flagged this content on the internet and you need to prove you're the author. And I'd found like old blog posts of mine that had been like copied and pasted onto like other people's websites and stuff. And it's like I knew that was a thing, but I didn't know like it was a like if I wanted to use my own blog content and make a book that like I could run into some snags or other people had like what do you call it? There's a term for it. And, like not even like maliciously copying and pasting and pretending it's theirs, but curating
There you go.
content.
Yeah, that's what it is.
For some reason that word was escaping me. And so like I had to go around and ask people to remove stuff. I told Amazon this is mine. So with the Tongues book, I was like I had enough content on my blog to know people were Googling stuff that landed them on my site, but I didn't want to have like this kind of problem again. So as much of it as possible was fresh content. And then and I self-published it. And then after like a year, somebody at Destiny Image got in touch with me wanting to publish it. So that was how it worked in my case with that book. And yours, how did it come about that somebody somebody contact you, or did you reach out to them, or?
Yeah, yeah. It's actually really just one of those strange kind of like this was God stories. Like, we all have this stuff that like it's so bizarre that it's only God. And about 6 years ago, I read a book by Bill Johnson called When Heaven Invades Earth. And this book like wrecked me. Okay. I cried. I wept while I was reading it. By the time I got done reading, the pages had tear stains on them. And I remember as I finished it, I held the book in my hands and it was just like one of those moments where it was really heavy. And I was just like, I knew that I was changed. And I looked at the book and I didn't even know who Bill Johnson was. It's not like I even knew about Reading or any of that. And I just remember looking at the book and it was published by Destiny. And I said to myself, I want to do something like this one day. I want to change the world because of something that I wrote. And I had a friend of a friend of a friend who had been published. And then I heard about all that she went through to be published. Like she had to pay like, I don't know, $20,000 or something. And she had to go through like a very extensive ordeal to be published. So as I was recalling what my friend's friend's friend had gone through, I was saying to the Lord, not even as a prayer of a request, like, God, do that for me. But I was just like, I don't want to have to jump through a million hoops. What I would love is to have something that is so powerful that, and it's so life-changing that a publisher would want to get that message out there. And I wouldn't have to pay. And in fact, they would seek me out. And it wasn't formed even as like an official prayer, like, oh God, please do this for me. I just thought like, I want to do this one day. And so I just like filed that in the back of my mind, moved on with life. And I've always been like a journaler. Like I journaled in spiral notebooks before we had MacBooks. So
or tablets.
Right, or tablets or any of that. So, like, I have spiral notebooks around here somewhere that would make me look like some sort of a crazy woman because just it's sporadic and wild writings that I have written over the decades. So, so I continue to write and blog about just whatever was on my heart. But 3 years ago, I joined a supernatural Bible school called Welton Academy. So I joined Welton Academy and like I had a lot of passion in life before then, but I didn't really have a theological leg to stand on. Like I was passionate about the Bible and I would have told anyone, I believe the Bible, but I really I had trouble like understanding certain things and I couldn't reconcile certain parts of the Bible with other parts of the Bible at the time. I was just like, this is so confusing to me because I'm not really sure I understand this. But in the first year of Welton Academy, I just like I learned so much. And I think what I loved the most about school is that I learned how to understand the whole Bible. Like, honestly, I may not understand everything, but if I sat down for a couple of hours, I could study some things out and help anybody who wanted to understand a certain like verse or chapter or like, what in the world does this mean, kind of thing. So that's what I loved, is that it equipped me to understand the Bible. So I start combing through scripture with like a new heart, a new fervor, and I'm seeing all these things that I had never noticed before about women in leadership, about just being a woman in general. I was noticing things like that really contradicted the Christianese things we hear Christians repeat. And I was just like, does anybody else know this is here? Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one who's ever seen this. I mean, obviously that's very naive, but I'm combing through it and I'm just like, this this doesn't really line up with what we've been taught our whole life, but it's here in the Bible for anybody who would like to see it. So, but the things that I was seeing was stuff about like dating and relationships and purity and modesty and even submission in marriage. I was seeing things there for the first time with like a brand new eye. So I was like, I'm going to start writing, but I don't even know. This could be like groundbreaking for all I know, which it's not. I'll say that now that I know. But so I start writing, and I'm like, I don't know, maybe I am called to write a book. And so I was just like, I'm going to start writing. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to write. And so that's what I did. But I 1 year ago, I got a job offer working for Doug Addison, who lives in Los Angeles, but I'm his social media director here in Virginia. And Doug has different webinars that he does. And one of his webinars was called Write Your Book Now or Write a Book Quickly. I can't remember because there's a book and a webinar, and I might have those two titles backwards. So as his social media coordinator, I attended these webinars, and it just rocked my world. I was just like, okay, I've been writing like a crazy woman, but I'm not really getting anywhere very fast. And after attending his webinar and reading his book, because there are two, there's a webinar and a book, and I went through both of them. I was just like, I just felt like I knew what the next step was, and I knew what the next step was, and it made me just sit down and I was like, okay, I'm going to do a table of contents. Okay, I'm just going to break this down into bite-sized chunks, and I'm going to write my way through it. So I started writing this, and I got a message from a friend on Facebook who I had no idea worked for Destiny. I couldn't even tell you how we know each other now, except for that we just run in similar circles. And
Right.
so she messages me on Facebook. Are you going to submit what did she say? Are you going to submit a book proposal to me? And I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't even know. Who is this anyway? So I go and do a little Facebook stalking. Like, okay, we've all done that to somebody. I do a little Facebook stalking, and I'm like, oh my goodness, she works for Destiny Image. And I'm just like having this wild moment where I remember myself with the Bill Johnson book. And I'm just like, I don't even want to get my hopes up right now because this is so wild. But I realized she worked for Destiny, and I didn't really have a proposal, and I didn't even know what a proposal was. But I went back and messaged her, just tell me where to send it because I'll just do it.
Right.
So she gives me an email address and a link that explains a little bit more about what is involved in the book proposal. And I was just like, I'm not going to sleep until I have this book proposal ready, and I'm going to send it, and we're going to do this. And so I did. And they accepted the book, and it's been a very, very cool journey for me.
Right. My journey is something like that. I've been blogging almost 12 years now. And like when I started, there wasn't social media. There wasn't like how to, share it on Twitter and stuff. And I remember I had to learn HTML code to do my own links on a sidebar. And then like a year later, that was a feature, like it was just something that, like I remember stuff that like is just, drop and, mix and match. But like, anyway, and I'd been doing that for years and years. And yeah, I've changed focus a bit and stuff too over the years, and eventually migrated to like my own, like my name.com and stuff. But it was 5 years ago or more. Like I've also accumulated Destiny Image books over the years, and I too read that Bill Johnson book a longer time ago than what you said. And it never dawned on me like I want to write a book for Destiny Image someday. But the more I was blogging and blogging, I was like, I could write books. And like I remember before having a Kindle, before like when you live in another culture and you can't get books and you're an avid reader, you're borrowing everybody's books, and like I'm resisting the urge to highlight and mark up and stuff because they're not my books. And so I remember one trip where there was some kind of conference at Morningstar in South Carolina. I forget the name of the city at the moment where they're based, and it's close to Charlotte, where I was going every year, right? Because that's where my Bible college moved to. And I remember buying a box of books, like not a box, but like a pile of books, and a few people giving me books and whatever, and spreading them out in my suitcases so they weighed the limit, because now I'm like these are going to last me a few months in Peru, and probably like 10 books or 11 books, and like only two of them were not Destiny Image.
Mm-hmm.
just by coincidence, right? Like it wasn't some kind of thing like, oh, Destiny Image, I'm gonna make sure to buy only their books. And in that year, my friend Dave was really getting serious about trying to get his manuscript turned into a book, and it was content on a site we made together at the time. And so I knew what the content of the book was, and he recommended I listen to Don Norai's like his blog talk radio thing. And so we were both listening to it one morning, and Dave calls in and asks him a question or whatever. And then, in the same call, the same show, like I call in too and get through, no problem. They're like, okay, hold on, he'll answer you in like 5 minutes. And I had a question for him too about how you're ready, like to write a book. 'Cause, like I feel like I don't have a specific message or passion. I'm just like a general teacher. Like you tell me what the topic is, or like in our school, I tell our leader, Mark, you just tell me the stuff you don't want to teach on the calendar, and I'll do the rest because I'm good with that. But if it's this or this, I want to teach it. And so I asked him, like, how do you know you're ready to write a book? How do you know when it's time? And he said, like, if you had a room of 5,000 people and you only had 1 hour to talk to them, what would you preach to them? And I forget what I said, but I don't remember it being very specific. Like it was about like the Holy Spirit or something. And he said, there you go. That's your book. And so, I mean, it took some honing in on just like speaking in tongues eventually, right? But I tested the waters with Amazon and doing short Kindle books and stuff, because then I learned it doesn't matter how short or how long they are on Kindle, and there's no publisher and all that kind of stuff. So I went for that first, and then I did that with the tongues book, and didn't even try to get published because I was just seeing the benefits of self-publishing, right? And then my friend Brad, who I'd been in like a Facebook friends or something for a while, he just started working for Destiny Image and decided to show his bosses or whatever that book, and then I too had to do a book proposal so that he could have something to show everybody, and it's like a year-long process. Like it was like Thanksgiving or Christmas, and then like a year later and a bit later, it's finally out. So yours comes out like in what, July or June, or it's
July.
Yeah, so it's still a few months off, but
Yeah.
and I love it. It felt really weird so far having a team, having a bunch of people involved in like something I came up with or I've created. Like do you have an exhilaration or something like that as a writer?
Yeah, it's been like there's a flip side of that coin too, because I don't know what your personality type is, but well, in case you're familiar with it, in Myers-Briggs, I'm an ENFP. So some would say the P stands for procrastinator, but that's not technically what it means.
I'm an ENTJ or something like that.
So you're a J. The J's tend to be more orderly and not necessarily organized, but can deal well with structure and prefer it that way. Whereas a P is more of a like free thinker, like please don't chain me in your boxes kind of person.
Right.
And so there were some really surreal moments for me, like this is amazing that there are other people that want to make this happen too. Like, and the agent they assigned to my book or to me or whatever, Sierra, she's amazing and I love her to pieces. The editor that worked on the manuscript was amazing, but there were moments for me because book production requires the J type of personality because you have to have that order and structure to birth something like that, to say, okay, we have this deadline, we have that deadline. But my P personality type, that loose, free spirit was just like, oh my gosh, you want me to have another deadline?
Yeah.
And like, are you seriously emailing me about this again? And now you want another deadline and I have to get you this picture and that summary and this. And so I had moments where I was just like, ugh, and I was just having to remind myself that I had prayed these people into my life.
Right.
Because I told God, you know me and you know I can't do this on my own. I just can't do it. I need structure and order, but it doesn't come from inside of me, like, because I'm just not very good at that. It's not my strength, and I don't want it to be my strength. So he really put people around me that were that mom and pop kind of people that were just like, you know, they were calmer than me because I'm a little bit hyper of a person and like high strung.
No, I don't have that impression.
And they were just like steadiness and peace and like, even with the deadlines they gave me, I started to realize that they were giving me like soft deadlines because even when I missed the deadlines, which I did almost every time, they're just like, honey, you need to get me this and just walking me through everything very kindly. And I thought that was really just shows the brilliance of the Father because he really put people in my life that are different than me, but necessary to help me do the things that he's called me to do.
Right. Yeah. Not to get talking too much about my book because I have you on to talk about yours. But one thing that was interesting is when you're filling out the book proposal and it asks like how many speaking engagements you've got in the next year and how many like, you know, social media followers and all this kind of stuff. And I wrote back and I like to Brad and I was like, dude, you know, I'm a missionary down here and I don't even know if I'll be in America in the next year. And he's like, no, that's okay. That's okay. You know, we think this book is good. And this is to see how you fit in or how we'll fit you in, you know? And but I just remember like the book proposal intimidated me. And I think that's why I had never done one before. Like I'd been to Destiny's site and saw the book proposal and I thought, oh, well, they want my book, then good. I'll just give it to them and sign whatever they want. And, you know, make sure I'm not signing my life away. Because that's the other thing is, you know, you probably don't have an agent or something either. Because I don't and I didn't. So I talked to like 20 people before signing anything, you know, to get people's advice. And I had heard horror stories. I heard people talk me. I had, you know, a mix of people talking me out of it and another mix of people saying, you know, like one guy told me, I have given my manuscript to like 20 people before someone wanted it, and you've got a book publisher coming to you. I would just give it to them if I were you. Who cares if you don't? Who cares if you don't own it anymore? You know what I mean? Like all the things I was worried about. Some people were like, "You're right to be worried," and then other people were like, "No, you know, give it to them." You know what I mean? You're not gonna. And then now that it's out, it's like, okay, so how do I get people to know about it? How do I get people to like want to buy it? Why would a store want to, you know, like stock it? And at the same time, it's like I don't care. I'm happy that I can say I published a book, but there's that. Well, I did write it so as many people as possible could read it, and so now it's a whole other ball game of marketing and promoting it and stuff. So anyway, God's feminist movement. So where do you want to go first? About the book itself, or your testimony, your background? Because you got a pretty wild testimony. So which one of those two would be easiest to start with?
Well, I can start with the book and summarize. My testimony is actually in the book,
Sure.
because I felt like in order to go where I needed to go in the book, I really needed to give people a background story. But, God's feminist movement is not about a political agenda. That's not where I'm going with it. What my heart is that I believe that the Father is bringing into the body of Christ a movement where he's calling the moms up to lead with the dads. This isn't about saying, down with the men. We're not. There's no man hating allowed in God's feminist movement, because it's really about co-heirs. It's about being co-heirs. It's about ruling and reigning with Christ and advancing the kingdom together with equal authority in the body of Christ. So there's no down with the men picket signs allowed and things like that. But the overall summary of the book, some of the things I talk about are submission and marriage. I talk about dating. I talk about beauty, and the things that God has shown me about what it means to be beautiful. And I talk about some of the really, like, for a woman, these are like hot topics, because there's extreme tradition that is like oozed into these, and people say things like, well, this is the way it's supposed to be. And for many women that have grown up Christians, we think, oh, well, then it must be in the Bible. And some of it is really not. It's just simply the traditions of women. It's the traditions that we pass down, not maybe knowing why we're adopting this into our lives, but it's because this is what we've always been told. So I have a very maybe different perspective on some of these things, but it's very biblical, and I gave like enough scriptural like references to fuel someone's studies for years within my book. So I don't really, what I don't do in this book is try to build a case for women in ministry, because there are other books that have already done that. Powerful and Free by Danny Silk is one of them. Fashion to Reign by Chris Valentin. Normal Christianity by Jonathan Welton has a chapter on women in ministry. But Powerful and Free goes through every single verse in the Bible that is considered, basically, he calls it a problem verse, but he's not trying to say the Bible is a problem. What he's saying is that people have misinterpreted the context, and therefore are not holding true to the original meaning of the text. For example, women be silent in church, or I do not permit a woman to speak in church. So what he does is he carefully goes through and he teaches what this means in context. How does it apply to the modern New Covenant believer, etc.? So I don't do that in my book. I do not try to build a case for why women should be allowed to lead, but I address things that women who do lead face in a daily basis as a leader. The submission in marriage, I think, is probably a perspective that is really different than what we normally hear in the average church, especially charismatic churches. But basically, as I was reading the scriptures with pretty much like a new, fresh set of eyes, because I was like, okay, I'm not going to read the Bible trying to make it be what I want it to be, because what I already think I believe. I'm just going to read it, and I'm going to start letting it teach me. I'm going to let the Holy Spirit teach me through the Bible, instead of trying to, force the scripture to affirm what I already believe. And one of the things that I had learned in Bible school that really, really opened my eyes is that in the original manuscripts they were letters a lot of times to other believers. So Paul would write Timothy, and this is the letter, and now it's our Bible. But in order to understand what certain scriptures mean, we also need to remember that they were a letter. And so we're peeking into their private conversation kind of thing. And some of them were instructions to other churches and things like that, specific churches. But what really, really like shocked me, I don't know why it shocked me, because common sense, if you think long enough about this, would tell you this, but it had never occurred to me. There aren't any chapter breaks or verses in the original letters. Like Timothy wasn't like, all right, verse 3 of my letter or whatever. Paul, I'm sorry.
Can you imagine writing your emails that way?
Exactly, right? So we're on verse 3 now. Or here's chapter 2 of my email to you. I've already headed the chapter for you. But
if you're an ENTJ or whatever, that kind of thing might actually not be funny to you. It might be, but anyway.
You might like that if you're an ENTJ. But I was reading through Ephesians 5, actually, where we have some instruction given to families. And it dawned on me that there was a chapter break in between verse 21 and 22. Let me make sure I'm pulling that up right. Oh, I turned this off. Sorry. There's a chapter break. So if I'm quoting it right, I may have one verse off, but I'll double check it. Verse 21, I believe, is submit to one another. And verse 22, I believe, is wives submit to your husbands. And so as I was reading this, I was just like, I was realizing that there's a chapter break right in between those. So there's a shift that takes place that really wasn't there in the original letters. And so I was seeing this and I was just like, wait a second. What if submission goes both ways in marriage? What if there's not a hierarchy? What if, and so I began to read and scour other verse.
It's not a chapter break, but you probably have like a subtitle, like right there, verse 21 of verse 22.
Subtitle. That's what I meant to say. Sorry about that.
No worries.
And it varies depending on which version of the Bible you're reading, but most have a subheading. You're right.
Yeah. But that does cut off, and chapter 6 begins with children obey your parents, right?
Yes.
So, gotcha.
Yes. So I guess I was really just reading this with new eyes, thinking like, maybe this doesn't mean exactly what we've always thought it meant. And I went on down and read where it says in Ephesians 5 as well, for husbands to love your wives as Christ loved the church. And I found it, I just began to ponder on that. And I was just like, nobody anywhere, hopefully, is saying, well, I'm a wife, I don't have to love my husband. The Bible commands husbands to love their wives. That doesn't go both ways. We just naturally understand it because the Bible calls us to love one another. Well, I started to see that the Bible also calls us to submit to one another. So I felt like I was like I was just having a light bulb moment. But for me personally, I'm a strong-willed person. I'm a more loud and opinionated type of woman, whereas what's commonly accepted as feminine is quiet and timid and submissive. So when I got married, it was like I believed that, and this was my beliefs when I married, that my husband had the last say. He was my boss. And these were the things that I was programmed to believe because of my background. This is the way I had been raised. It was the only thing I ever saw. Dad is the boss, and what he say goes. And mom might have a say, but at the end of the day, it's what dad says that goes. I'm thinking from a kid's perspective. But I went through book after book after book that were, the aim of the book was to teach me to submit. And I was basically torturing myself, even though I didn't realize it. And now we have a marriage that's very healthy. My husband is totally supportive of my ministry. He's supportive of the things that I teach about submission. And now we have a marriage where we mutually submit to one another. My husband is probably a J. We talked about Myers-Briggs. He leads our finances. In the past, I led them, and it didn't. I got things done, but it was like always a scramble, and it always made me really stressed out. So my husband leads the finances. There are other areas where I lead in. I'm basically, for example, I'm a stronger teacher than he is, and so if we had, although he's a hot and fiery preacher, like he can preach a house down, and sometimes I think, man, I'd really like to be more like that. Although that's him, and we can embrace each other's differences, embrace our strengths and weaknesses, and now we have a really beautiful thing going. Whereas in the beginning of our marriage, it was about who was going to dominate the other person, and he wasn't. I was in the wrong too, because there I was reading these books about how to submit, and really what it was doing to me was I was having this like really kind of sick mind games going on, where it was like, I'll submit, but I'll be really manipulative to try to control the situation still. And now, if I disagree, I'll just be like, I disagree. That probably is going to be a bad idea, but let me tell you why. And we talk it through, and we move forward when we're in agreement. So there's a totally different dynamic now than when we were first married. So that's been a pretty, like, out of the people that I asked to endorse a book, that was one of the things that I heard back from a few of my mentors, like, wow, Amber, this is really different. Like, we're not even sure if we can swallow all of this. Like, it was just a couple of people, but I broke things down really simple.
When you say they couldn't swallow, like people who basically like, I'm just gonna ask like this way, females or men?
Men.
Yeah. That's what I suspected. I was just trying to see if you'd say it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't like it to be an us versus them kind of thing.
Sure.
And my heart on that. But yeah, there were two different male mentors that I've looked up to for a very long time, and I knew that I was taking a risk by putting my story out there, and I knew that I was taking a risk by presenting this new idea to charismatic Christianity, but I know that it's the only way to bring change is to take a risk of being criticized, and taking a risk of somebody saying, well, that's a heretical statement. Every revolutionary was called a heretic. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
And so to bring change to the church, it's going to take people who are brave enough to say, this is what the Bible says, and we have to understand it in context as well, and risking people saying, well, that's stupid, or that's blasphemous, like, okay, well, that's maybe a little dramatic to call it blasphemous, but let me explain, let me lay out this teaching for you. And if at the end of the day you still don't agree, then we can disagree in an academic, mature way, instead of the name calling and
right.
things that we often see. So, right. Yeah.
It's interesting because this last time that I was in Canada, I went to like the local bookstore with a copy of my book, wanting to see if they would sell it or I could leave a copy. And the woman there was someone that I knew from this church I was a part of that like split, and she'd gone to the other side, and she was like, "Oh, Steve, I think your book is great, but I can tell you my boss will not stock it. She is like anti-charismatic, and just this title will put her off. You can try if you want, but I'm just gonna like warn you. That's what I think is gonna happen." And so I went and I was looking at the shelves, and there's all these books that were like, would give Jonathan Welton an aneurysm, like the Shemitah and these books about like, and I'm like, she stocks this crap, you know what I mean? But like, is against like this other, like basically segment of the church. And, but incidentally, I saw a book by a woman who had gone to my mom's church, and I knew was a self-published author or an author or whatever. So I bought her book, and I had no idea what I was in for. Her name is Judy Piers, and the book is called Playing Second Fiddle. And she was talking about I didn't even finish reading it, not because it was bad, but because I'm just like 20 pages short of finishing it or whatever. But I was reading it, I couldn't put it down when I started, and she was basically sharing how she got up in some setting to preach, and she felt like electricity or something going through her while she was in the podium, and it was like, but I'm not allowed to do this, and so she was like, for like years or maybe decades, like wrestling with this, and felt like God called her to go be a part of the church that I grew up in, that I know her from. And her spin on this idea of playing second fiddle is that there's not a first fiddle or a second fiddle, right? Like, in if you form a band or an orchestra, every instrument plays its part, and we've acted like one is more important than the other, and I'm not sure if where she's going in the book, because I've not finished it, but like I got the vibe it's a pro like women in ministry type of book, but at the same time it's not, because there's not like a this and a this, like a head and a below, and there's not that. It's like an orchestra with like there's a guitar, there's drums, there's flutes, there's whatever, and we all play a part. And so the whole men can be pastors and women can't, or whatever, basically disrupts the orchestra that you can have. And that's like a summary of what I'm getting out of the book. And she shares a lot of stories and experiences and stuff. But so yeah, that's what you made me think of with everything you were just sharing right there. But like, I know I grew up with people who basically would say things like, well, I'm not gonna go to that church or that conference because those guys over there let women be pastors. And it's like, well, how do you know you're not going to get something out of what they have to offer, even though they're just different than you? They're not. I'm not going to be able to get anything, because God's very clear in the scriptures that and even Destiny Image posted some link to a book on their fan page, and someone left a comment saying like, "See, this is the problem I have with you guys. You guys, publish female authors or something." And I'm like you begin with this faulty premise that you're not even open minded to have holes poked in and see if that's really truth, and and it's not just men. Like, I've heard women who staunchly believe this, and a number of years ago, this friend of mine, he's like the go-to translator guy. Like, it seems like anybody who's in town on a mission trip or whatever that needs a translator, he's one of the people that they hire. And he was near my house. He called on me one Saturday night or something. So I went and met up with, it was him and another guy and this woman. And from chit-chatting and learning about one another, she was like, I think she was studying for like a PhD or something like that in seminary. And later on in the conversation, something I said about like, in Christ there's no male nor female, she like just corrected me, and like I felt like I had no, I'm not smart enough to have an answer for what she launched at me. And I heard the Holy Spirit say, like, she's just hiding behind like, I've called her to be a preacher, but she's hiding behind this stuff. And so I just kind of like, found a way later to kind of mention like, I don't know if this means anything to you, but you're called to preach, I think, but you're using all your theological like stuff as an excuse not to. You're using like the people you're running with, the circles you're in, as like this excuse. Maybe you're afraid of like, what will happen or something. And I have no idea if I was missing the mark or not. She just kind of looked at me like a deer caught in the headlights. But I remember thinking to myself, like, how many people might be called to something, women, but are missing out on these things too because of bad teaching, because of stuff like, I assume your book probably will help lay a foundation to clarify, not just like in charismatic churches, but like I said, I grew up in Plymouth Brethren, and I run with some like Baptist and other evangelicals down here from time to time, and I encounter that kind of stuff all the time. So
yeah, that's what I actually love, crossing those unseen boundaries, and like being able to cross cultural lines and reach people that are very different than ourselves. Most of the time, I see people surround themselves with people just like them. And I have a real curiosity about cultures that are different than my own. And so I like to go and like infiltrate. This sounds so covert, like a spy, and but I just like to go and I like to meet people who have the I know up front. I already know their beliefs are very different than mine, and not go in like waving a banner of like I'm about to take this thing down, but just go in and just love people and make friends, and eventually. Those same friends are like sneaking around asking me questions like about things that would be very controversial in their circles, but I'm not offended by anything. Like I'm just not offended. Um, I don't know. None of that stuff. Like I don't get scared to talk about um, touchy subjects and things like that. So I don't have any problem crossing those lines. And even if somebody says, "Well, I think that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," and I don't agree with it, still, I'm just like, okay, it doesn't matter
It's
because
okay. You're wrong.
I'll accept that you're wrong, and I forgive you for being wrong. No, I'm just kidding. I just
Right.
know that not everybody's open to hearing something in every season of their life, because there was a time when I was really closed off to certain ideas. There was a time when I would have thought that my own book needed to be dealt with. Like, let's burn this thing, because I
Right.
wouldn't have agreed with it. I would have thought, this is not right, because this is teaching that women have a voice. This is teaching that all sorts of things that I didn't necessarily agree with then, but I was coming out of a lot of legalism. I was coming out of some, in my opinion, really dangerous teachings, and the Lord was being so gentle, leading me out of that bondage. But it's very important for us to be able to like conversate with people who don't agree with us and still not completely like jack them up, like, oh, you don't agree with me? Well, bam, 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 and your mom's ugly, kind of thing. Like, what? You can't do that, because eventually they might be open to what we had to say if we would have just chilled out and just said, okay, you don't agree with me? You think I'm a moron? Okay, it's all right.
Right.
You
And
know?
I feel like having grown up in the type of setting I was in, not just for like the egalitarian versus complementarian thing, like women are complementary or whatever. And not just for those reasons, but other doctrines, other, charismatic things. Having grown up in an atmosphere that was like not fostering that stuff, and then getting to like go off to like a Bible college that was nothing like that. I think like those kind of experiences not only help me with patience with people who might listen to what I say, because I'm showing them the like patience and not just body slamming them doctrinally or something, right? Uh, like, and that helped inform some of the stuff like I even wrote in the book, and the way I shared some of my testimony and wove that into it. I think like you can be completely right about something and then 100% wrong in how you communicate it and how you like I'm listening to a lot of these audiobooks lately that are like Seth Godin and entrepreneurial kind of people. And in one of them, they were talking about the guy who basically discovered like we need to wash our hands or whatever, like some kind of sanitation thing. Did you hear about this?
Yeah, this
Where
is good. Go ahead.
if I'm remembering right, he he was basically, there's a high infant mortality rate of something, and he was basically saying it's because the doctors aren't washing their hands, and there's this E. coli infection or something that these children are getting, and so like now in 2016 we're like duh, but apparently this particular doctor was a jerk. And he was
Yeah.
he was a jerk to his peers, and he would treat people like crap. And so it took like decades before like these ideas that he was right about were ever really accepted and implemented because of basically the delivery, you know? And so
Yep.
imagine how many lives were lost. And And I feel there could be like the same type of urgency with certain revelations, like women in ministry and stuff, like the types of things God could put in some women to share, to preach, to write, to do whatever with their gifts. And you could be right about it, and then it's just on the part of the person who's not accepting. But then what happens if like we're basically giving people I don't say we as in like I'm a woman, but I'm going back to like talking about like a revelation or something. But like if we're basically giving people an excuse not to listen to us by our attitude, by our behavior or stuff like that. And because like I can think of one setting where I was years and years ago when I lived in Holland. I was in a like a conference where one of the keynote speakers was a woman preacher, and she was very like difficult to swallow, like just her attitude and her delivery. And I remember someone asking a question like, where in the Bible is that thing you're talking about? And she just was like, do I have to? Like, do I have to cite the scriptures? And it was just like, okay. And, I remember a few people come up to me because I was kind of like involved in putting it on. Like I really had a hard time with that. Do you buy into everything? She said, no, I mean, I get what you're saying. Yeah, that was kind of rude how she was, deflecting any questions people would ask her and stuff. And I'm like, but like the other, there's like good meat on those bones. You know what I mean? It's too bad that like that's how she carried herself and that's how she preaches and talks to people who ask her questions and stuff. And so it's like, I don't know what my question out of that is or what that is informing that you might want to say to that. But
Well,
yeah.
sorry.
No.
I think it's really important for us to keep our hearts pure, and that's really where that comes from. Is because because this could cross over and cover a very broad spectrum. People who've been mistreated in the past. Let's say a voice for the Native Americans, a voice for Black Lives Matter. If the voice is angry and ready to decapitate people, then their whole message is not heard. But if we'll get healing of the pain of those memories, so for me, the pain was maybe being asked to leave a pastor's meeting because I wasn't a man. Being told,
and you're saying that has happened.
Yeah. Yeah, it has happened. So for me, it was just giving those things to Daddy God and saying like, man, they hurt my feelings, Dad, like, okay, I forgive them. They don't owe me anything. I release that. And like, I had to let that heal. I had to get, like, it's easy to just be like, oh, this isn't bothering me and just shove it down. Like, well, I'll show them, I'm just going to study and I'll have a doctorate and blah, blah, blah. Well, but that's the wrong attitude if that's why I'm doing it.
Right.
And if I don't get healing, then I am just going to be another angry woman yelling in a mic saying down with the men, our heart, the contents of our heart and the health of our emotions, it's very important. Whether we think it is or not, it comes across in our writing. It comes across in our speaking. And, the same message can be tainted with bitterness and it's just lost on people. So
right.
we have, as ministers and leaders, we have a responsibility to keep our hearts pure. I mean, we all know that one leader who've been they've been mistreated by people for so long. All leaders get mistreated. All people get mistreated by other people.
Sheep
period.
bite.
Yeah, I know, right? Exactly. But as a leader, we end up in a position where we are more commonly possibly treated badly. But if we don't process it and deal with it, forgive people and move on, then we're just going to we might burn out. We might end up falling into the same sin that we judge in other people's lives too.
And that reminds me of something I heard Rick Joyner teaching about in the old covenant when like the Levites couldn't serve or minister if they had like unhealed wounds and scabs and stuff. And his take on it was, well, like when you're healing from a wound, like I tripped and fell on pavement last Saturday. I was carrying a lot of stuff and didn't see something that I tripped over, and I just took a tumble on the pavement and got a bloody knee. And for like a few days, it was tender and just sensitive to touch. Now it's just this dry like scab healing, right? But he was saying like the reason like a Levite couldn't be serving with like unhealed wounds or with like sores and cuts is because like then they're sensitive to touch. Like you can't really you bump into them, or you can't touch maybe wherever the cut is or whatever. And so it's the same thing, like like our hearts have to not be that way either, or we're not like going to be effective. We're going to be affecting how we interact and stuff. And like I've heard, whether it's female preachers or male preachers who have a chip on their shoulder about something that they might not. It's like maybe they walk with a limp, but they're so used to walking with that limp, they don't know they're limping, but like everybody else can see it. And so like what you're saying, I think, I'm just piggybacking on that when we're unhealed of stuff, it does seep into whatever we may be trying to communicate or preach,
Yeah, totally.
We hope you enjoyed today's show. If you'd like to subscribe to the podcast, you can find us in iTunes or on Stitcher Radio, or directly at fireonyourhead.com for more options. If you want to support Steve and Lily Brimner as missionaries in Peru, or find out more about what they do, be sure to head over to their blog at stevebrimner.com, or check out Steve's Kindle books on Amazon and leave reviews of the ones you liked. See you next time.